Welcome to this video. This video is about quick revision strategies, and it's for doctoral or master's writers writing a thesis, a dissertation, or a paper for publication, or even a paper for an assignment, any kind of writing. This is just to give you an idea of how to revise and how to break up the revision. My name is Cecile Badenhorst. I'm in the Faculty of Education at Memorial University, and this video has been funded by our School of Graduate Studies. So revision is more than just fixing grammar and spelling at the end. You know, once you've written a draft, then you fix the spelling and grammar. No, revision is much more than that. It's about crafting your paper. And it only works, what I'm going to tell you will only work if you have a process of writing that allows you to write drafts where you get it down, you focus on the message and the story, and it would be messy and have gaps and maybe poor spelling. And then you go into a revision phase where you fix it up. And this is where you move sections around, you add, you delete, you tweak, you rewrite, and that's where you craft the paper into shape. So if you use this process of writing, you'll find that you develop writing fluency because you're not editing while you're writing. So it gives you the freedom to focus on the message. And then when you revise, you're fixing up all the things that you want to fix up in those stages. So when you revise, you shift gears. You move from thinking like a writer. So when you're writing, you're in the writer's seat, you're thinking like a writer. When you revise, you need to shift into a reader position. So you begin thinking like the reader. How is the reader coming to this writing? So thinking like a reader, what does that involve? Well, it's putting yourself in your reader's shoes and saying, well, how will my reader understand my message? How is my reader seeing my text? Can my reader follow my thinking? Now I'm going to suggest 4 rounds of revision. These don't have to be long rounds of revision. They don't have to be revision rounds that you do at the end of a paper. You could work on a section and do this. But really what I'm suggesting is that when you revise, you focus on different elements. So the first revision round is the building blocks. And the reason why I think this is important and why this is the first round of revision is because these are the foundations. It's as if you were building the foundations of a house. If you don't have a revision round where you look at the foundations, then you could edit and edit and edit, do that proofreading edit, and it won't fundamentally change your paper because the foundation blocks aren't in place. So what I mean by foundation blocks, I mean the components that need to go into this paper or chapter, the conceptualization. So the problem, if that's relevant, the purpose, the context, the research questions. If you're working on something like a literature review, it would be, you know, you might have a key question for that research, a key research question for that literature review, but you would definitely have a purpose, and you would have concepts that you want to unpack. So you need to check that all these elements are clearly apparent in the introduction section of that chapter or the introduction of your thesis, and then carried through all the way to the conclusion section. So this is where you address the problem and you derive conclusions, or you answer research questions, or whatever question you've posed at the beginning of this piece of writing. So these are the foundational elements, the core things that are driving this paper. You have to go back to those, check that they're aligned, and make sure they're carried all the way through. So if you set up a research question at the beginning of the paper, you want to make sure that you've addressed that research question by the end. You don't want to leave that hanging. The same thing is that if you've identified a research problem, you want to make sure that that research problem has somehow been addressed at the end of this paper or chapter. So the foundational elements also include the content. Have you got the necessary concepts, the necessary source documents? Have you included all the themes that you need? Because that's part of the foundation is, do you have all the necessary components in there in terms of substantive issues? Then you also want to check your arguments. You know, if an argument is something that you are making up front in the paper, then what is your argument stated in the beginning? Have you carried it through? Do you have evidence to back up your argument? Have you included counter arguments to make your argument stronger, to show that you are aware of objections to your argument? These are all the foundational elements. Once you've got those foundational elements in place and everything's aligned, the next step would be to work on the structure. And this is really the architecture of our house that we're building here. And it's how the reader comes to the text, how they travel through the text. You know, what comes first, what comes second. It's really the design of your paper. So the questions you're asking yourself is, have I introduced my reader to this topic in the best possible way? Are the next sections in the best place for the reader to understand this? You might need to think of sequencing through the paper in terms of what does a reader need to understand first before they can move on to other things. You might need to, you know, unpack your concepts really early on, set up your arguments, and then, you know, build on that throughout the paper. There's a very good technique called reverse outlining, which will help you to structure your paper and reorganize paragraphs so that it is streamlined and organized. I'm not going to go through that technique now. I do have a video on it. You just have to search YouTube reverse outlining, and if you just Google reverse outlining, you will come up with how to do this. So you want to check that each paragraph discusses one main point and that you don't have lots of points in each paragraph. And you want to summarize sections in 1 or 2 sentences to see if your purpose is clear and that you're carrying your argument forward. So what I mean there is, when you come to a section in your paper, see if you can summarize it in 1 or 2 points where you say, what am I trying to say here? Okay, I'm trying to say this. And if that is clear, then you know you've got that structure laid out carefully enough. But if it's not clear and you can't write that sentence, then you might have to rethink how you're going to structure that section. Another good tip is to list all your headings on a separate sheet of paper and just see if there's a logical flow through those headings, because your headings provide the structure. They are what guide the reader, but they also guide you in terms of focus. And if you are writing a paper where you're not putting headings in, I would suggest in the draft phases that you do put the headings in and then take them out later. Headings are really important for helping us to structure a paper and to provide signposts for a reader. Part of this round of revisions is to have a look whether you have too much information in a paragraph and whether or not you need to break them up. Paragraph breaks give a reader a breather. They give them breathing space. So if you look at your page and the whole page is full of text, then I can guarantee your reader's going to be exhausted after that. So be kind to your reader and break up your long pages of text and give them some space to move through it. And also don't be afraid to really revise, move sections, add in things, delete things. Don't get precious about your work because it's been such hard work to write it. And as I've said there, don't be shy. Wrangle that paper into shape. There's nothing more satisfying than reorganizing a paper and then it comes out into this beautiful shape. So don't be shy about doing that. You can always save your original document as, document 1, and then work on your second document, document 2, do all these changes, and if you don't like it, you can go back to document 1. But 9 times out of 10, you'll just keep moving forward. Okay, revision 3. Now what we're coming to with revision 3 is now we're getting to the flow. And this is really the functionality of the house, the kind of wiring, how things are connected. I couldn't really show you a picture of how wiring is connected smoothly within a house, so I just put this one in. But this is really how the electricity, it connects everything, and when you turn on the lights, they work. Or you turn on the tap and water comes out. So that's what you do with crafting and coherence, is that your reader doesn't see the work that you've done. They are just enjoying the message. So how do you do this? Well, coherence is all about allowing your reader to float through that paper. So you want to make sure your golden thread or key message is clear all the way through the paper. For each paragraph, you're asking, what is the purpose of this paragraph? If it doesn't fit in, or there's no real purpose, then you cut it or you rewrite it to make it fit in. This is where you have to think about the beginnings and endings of sections, the beginnings and endings of paragraphs, and how they link together. So you want to have a really good introduction. This is where you can bring some creativity into it and have a hook that pulls the reader in. You want to have a really strong conclusion that consolidates either your argument or the message that you want to get across. And you want to have within your paper, within the sections, beginnings and endings that are stronger and that are continuing your argument all the way through, but are sending these messages to the reader. I'm going to tell you this, I've told you this, and this is why it's important. So that the reader doesn't have to go and look for it and uncover it where you've hidden it, under this sentence or that paragraph. And the reader isn't pulled out of the message to go and look for meaning somewhere in the paper. They can just float along through this. So you want to look at the transitions between paragraphs. So, are you linking all your paragraphs? Every single paragraph should be linked somehow. And I have a video on coherence if you want to go and look at that. And that explains a number of different techniques that you can use to create this flow in your paper. Create signposts for your reader. And these are phrases that show movement between ideas so that your reader can follow your thinking. So although you know when you're changing gears, sometimes the reader doesn't follow you. So you need to have these signposts in there. And these are just short words or phrases where you might say, Jones argues this, but in contrast to Jones, this other author argues something else. So then the reader can see very clearly how you are positioning yourself with one author and against another author. These signposts are very useful for a reader and it helps with the flow. Okay, then we come to the final revision phase, which is the editing and the proofreading. And this is where most people start. But if you start with this, it's hard to build. If you start with editing and proofreading, you can edit and you can proofread it, and it can be perfect in terms of grammar, perfect in terms of spelling, but you could still have a lot of foundational problems in place, like I've tried to get you to do in the revision round 1, and in terms of structure, revision round 2, and you could also have these coherence issues as well. So this is the final stage. It's not the beginning stage of revision. And what we do with editing and proofreading is this is where we put the finishing touches to our house. This is where we add the splashes of color. We make sure that the house is friendly to visitors. We color code things. So we make it look good. That's what we're doing. It's the presentation of the paper or the chapter. So we're revising for presentation, and this is where you do line by line editing, checking, you're checking grammar, spelling, formatting, those kinds of things, you're referencing. And one of the things I would suggest is that you use a pen to go under the sentences or the lines, or use your computer cursor, because when we read something we're familiar with, our eyes often jump, and they don't just jump across the line, they jump down the page. So you often don't see a lot of your sentences because you're used to it and your mind's filling in the blanks. And you need something to slow down your eyes. So if you use your hand or a pen or your cursor, you'll be able to see every line. Another tip would be to read it aloud. In reading it aloud, you can definitely tell all sorts of things, and that will help you edit as well. So this is where you make decisions about language. You can go through and say, well, my language is quite abstract. Maybe I need to make it more concrete. Maybe I need to introduce a few words that are more image driven. Maybe I need to reduce the number of passive sentences. You know, we often have a lot of passive sentences in academic writing, necessarily so, but sometimes we overuse them. So in the introductions and the conclusions, you might want to make your language much more active and stronger, whereas in other parts of the paper, you might want to use a bit more caution. So think about your words, not just, you know, the spelling and the grammar. And then edit for vagueness. So things like this, that, there, it. Go through, search for them, and change them or remove them if you can. And then just look for where you've got these words like in order to, you know, and where you say utilize instead of use. So words that we don't really need, go through and have a look and see if you have any of those and take those out, because that will clean up your writing and make it much clearer. So that's what I'm saying about editing for clarity, formatting, and then whatever your citation formatting requirements are. In education, we tend to use APA. So that's, in this stage, that's what you do. Obviously, you can fix those up as you're going on, but this is where you really want to check. You want to check that they're all in alphabetical order and that everything in the text appears in the reference list at the end. So the reason why I'm suggesting that you revise in these 4 rounds is that it's what you're doing is you're focusing on different aspects of the paper or the chapter, and it really helps you to revise efficiently. And the more you use these rounds of revising, the quicker you get at them. So you could write a section and then quickly check, you know, does the section fit? Are all the foundational things in place? And if yes, then you move on to the next section. So they don't always have to be completely separate rounds once you've finished the paper. But it's more to give you an idea of what to look for when you're revising. And the coherence and the structure are really places where you can be quite creative then, and you can really think about how can I make this writing interesting? How can I create a path for my reader that's fun for them to go through, as much as academic writing can be fun. Yep, so I've just said this, think about revising sections as well as the whole paper. So you don't have to wait until you finish the whole paper. You can work on sections and then do a quick revision once you finish the whole paper. So the question I always get is, why should I spend all this time revising when I can just write it really quickly and then do a proofreading at the end? And the reason why you need to spend the time revising is because this is where the creativity comes in, and this is where you craft the paper for your reader. This is where you make the paper for your reader, but you also make it for yourself. And it can be a tough phase doing these revisions, but it can also be an incredibly satisfying phase when you see how this paper comes to life because of small things that you're doing to it. You know, just tweaking the beginnings and endings, linking things up, and then suddenly it comes together, and you can see how satisfying this reader is going to find this paper, or you as a writer become excited because you know how this reader is going to come to the paper. So revising to me is where the crafting happens. this is where I think the writing enjoyment, the enjoyment about writing comes in, because in the draft, that's the difficult phase. That's where you're doing the hard thinking work. But in the revising phase, it's fun to do the crafting and to think about words and to think about structure. So that's why I think you should think about these rounds of revising, because it really does produce a much better paper or chapter or whatever you're working on. My ultimate message is you want to be kind to your reader. You don't want to make your reader work. And what I mean by that is you don't want to like bury them under, you know, heavy, dense language without explaining what you're doing or your purpose, and then make them go back and read again and then wade through, you know, to the end and then say, okay, now what was this about? And then have to go back again. You know, it irritates readers, especially if they're reading for assessment purposes, but it's also just not fun. And you might have something really interesting to say, but if you don't pay attention to the writing, that message gets lost. So be kind to your reader. Think about how your reader comes to your writing and to your work, and try to make it as comfortable as possible for them and as enjoyable. And in that way, you will get far more readers than if you make it difficult, you know, for a reader to wade through. Just to reiterate that what I'm talking about here is a method of writing. And the method of writing is that you do quite a lot of prep work. And you can do that prep work through writing so that you have lots of notes. But you think about what you're doing, you break up the components, you think about it, you read, you write notes, you do outlines, you make plans. Then when it comes to writing, you write quickly and you use your notes and your plans. Because you've done a lot of prep work, it should be easy to pull it all together. And I'm using easy relatively here. And you don't want to worry about writing nicely at that point. You just want to get the message down. You want to focus on the message and what you're trying to say. So it might end up being extremely messy. And you might have sections with gaps where you just write to yourself, go back to this concept, or read so-and-so's paper on this concept, or fill in this section. So it might not be complete. And then you come to the revision round. And when you do the revision round, you begin to fix this up. You begin with the foundational elements. You move on to the structure, because the structure is so important. And then into the crafting, the coherence. And then finally, you work on the look of it, the presentation. So if you work like this, you'll find that your writing process is much less anxiety-driven. It's much more enjoyable. And you spend less time doing it, even though it seems like, you know, I'm telling you to spend more time on revising. But if you use this process, you'll develop a writing fluency, and the revision actually becomes second nature. And you're kind of writing, fixing up without thinking about it too much. Okay, thanks for watching this video. I hope that you take on board what I've said here. I definitely encourage you to craft your papers rather than to just do a brain dump and then send it in. Yes, I hope you found some strategies here useful, and I wish you all the best of luck with your revising. Bye.